Welcome to the Reclamation Point podcast, man. I'm your host, Mr. Moetown Lee.
Riding shotgun, his little brother, Dr. Ed Garnes.
Little brother, the G.
Dr. G now, praise God.
Yeah, how you been doing, bro?
Man, I ain't been doing good, so hopefully we'll talk about it, you know.
Listen, man. He said he ain't been feeling good, and that's one of them things. It's odd for Ed, cause he's one of them dudes that you call for like the uplifting, you know. But again, welcome to the Reclamation Point podcast. We hope that everybody out there listening is safe. We thank you for liking. We thank you for subscribing, for supporting us, because it's incredible.
It's healing.
And let me tell you, right? So I went out the other day to this Jack Daniels event, the Arts, Beats, and Lyrics. Shout out to Jabari. Shout out to Brian Green, all the people. So I went out, which is something I rarely do. And so many people was just like, yo, let me talk to you. I'm thinking they just like surprised that like, oh, you out.
You out.
You know what I mean? But they're like,
it ain't one music fest.
Right. And so many people came to me and talked to me about what we're doing here with the Reclamation Point.
Yeah.
And but that just like brought up my energy. I was like on 10. Everybody thought I was drunk because I was just like so hyped that, it's touching the people.
Yes.
Like it's touching our people. It's touching brothers. Sisters are getting, some understanding and they're reaching out. People are open to therapy and just addressing their mental well-being based on, just hearing our show. And I was like, damn, man, this is why we do it.
Yeah.
This is why we do it.
I mean, we do it from the heart, so it's not like you expect anything. And so when it comes back as a thank you and appreciation, it's like, oh, okay.
Yeah. And that's crazy, man, because sometimes, unless people come to you and talk or you see the comments or something, you tend to
like we just
think it's
talking
being
to the
missed.
air. Yeah.
You know what I mean? And, even though I enjoy talking to my brother, we talk all the time. The reason we started this was to serve a purpose and a principle. So to see that it is actually hitting the people, it's actually touching the people
in the heart.
That means a lot. Because a lot of people to get into it, we actually started this as a conversation. This was a conversation, something that I personally was going through, that, we talked to Ed about, and we just continued this thing, and we was like, hey man, let's
test this out in the marketplace.
Let's invite other people to experience this camaraderie and what we've been experiencing as brothers and as individuals, and so this is why we started it.
Yeah, why we exist.
Right. So I thank you to everybody that has reached out and came to us and came and let me know and let Ed know the importance of this, because that's what is going to make us keep going. With that being said, a lot has happened since we've last been here 2 weeks ago. So we got to talk about that, man. My brother, we weren't able. We were scheduled to film last week, and this is what Reclamation Point is about. We talk about it. We had a loss. One of a friend of mine, an industry friend of mine, an extremely close childhood friend, and basically a brother to Ed. We lost a brother. So Ed couldn't do, understandably, we couldn't do the show last week, but this week I was like, let's talk about grief.
Yeah, let's do it.
So first of all, like, how you doing?
Oh, I'm about 70 or 80%. Actually, this energizes me. You know what I'm saying? Like, I didn't have it to get through it last Friday because it had just happened, but this actually energizes me. But it underscores the point of what we were talking about being there for others, because first you got to be there for yourself. So I think having a conversation about grieving while I'm grieving is quite appropriate. So, yeah, man, I had to institute my healing rituals. Like, so, you know, I'm glad that you mentioned counseling. I had even forgot we were taping. Okay, that's right. Where my mind was when you said. I was like, great. Because sometimes you need permission. You know what I'm saying? So it's like before I could even think to counsel, you already knew, okay, he needs to counsel. So what I have been doing is just going to my healing rituals. And so for me, it's doing nothing. You know, first I just got to process, like, how do I feel? You know what I'm saying? So it's a lot of shock. I had a lot of mixed emotions because, you know, I lost my father under tragic circumstances. I lost my brother under tragic circumstances. So you're not just grieving that death, you're grieving other deaths, and then you're anticipating stuff to come. Right. You know what I'm saying? So that's anticipatory grief when we are grieving things ain't even happened yet. So I was all over the place. So, you know, I just took some time off, canceled everything. Jazz, old soul, stylistics, Payback is a Dog. I keep playing that song, you know what I'm saying? I just chilled, man. And it's like my grandma's spirit jumped into me. I started cooking, you know what I'm saying? I normally don't cook like meals like for 10 people, but you know, that's what I've been trying to do is just get my balance back.
And I noticed, I was like, I'm literally, the last few days when I talked to you, I'm like, this dude talking about I'm cleaning chicken. I'm like, didn't you just cook yesterday?
Exactly.
Yeah, I understand why what's been going on.
Man. It's like, you know, that's how my grandmother speaks to me. Like the kitchen is healing for me because the kitchen really was the first counseling center for me. So I was very close to my grandmother, and so not only was she dispensing wisdom in the kitchen, she also taught me how to cook. So there's a mental connection between, it's not because I love chicken, but it's a mental connection between cooking and healing because the kitchen provided that safe space for me. So I've been cooking like it's 10 people at my house.
And so I think before we, because you delve into like what you've been doing as far as that, like the healing rituals, but I think let's
back it up. Talk about grief.
Let's back up and talk about grief, because we gotta talk about actually what is grief, the different kind of griefs and different things, because we talk about grief, you know what I mean, in this situation we talk about grief as far as the loss of life, like you know, losing somebody extremely close to you. There's different types of grief and losses that, you know, occupation, you know, some people, you know, you can be, you know, laid off a job, losing a home, losing a love, you know, a relationship. There's a lot of different type of
loss,
griefs and losses. I mean, losses that make us, you know, grieve. And there's a lot of different ways to process that, because we just don't know. Like, you know, you can lose, you could be, you know, fit as a fiddle and turn an ankle, and, you know, because athletes go through grief when they have to have surgery and the game is taken away from them for that time, and they rehabbing. A lot of them during the process of rehabbing, like an ACL, they have to go through.
Perfect metaphor.
They have to go through counseling because now the game that they love and they've been able to operate and move a certain way is jeopardized. You know what I mean? It's in jeopardy of it being, of them playing and them being able to perform a certain way. So there's a lot of different kind of losses. There's a lot of different things that make us grieve.
And you say you're not a counselor. Come on, man.
I'm not.
Bro, you be dropping it. But yes, that is the perfect metaphor, because like we tell our audience all the time, Black life is one reclamation project. So that's why we're trying to help people get to a reclamation point. So I start with our brother, Reverend Dr. Gregory Ellison. You know, we mentioned his book before, Cut Dead But Still Alive. So think about, as Black men, all of the indignities and things that happen subtly and in our face just throughout our lifetime has a cumulative impact. So grief at its core is deep sorrow. Mm-hmm. Deep sorrow, deep sadness. That's all grief is. So you can grieve, like you said, the loss of opportunity. What are we trying to do as black men? Make money to take care of family. So if that's compromised, we can grieve that. So these small cumulative losses gets to this concept that I love about grief. Now, I come from a black psychological standpoint, so I don't look at grief the traditional Eurocentric way that grief has a timeline. There are steps. You move from anger to bark. I don't subscribe to that. I think grief for black men has to be culturally relevant. So we understand what disenfranchisement is. You know what I'm saying? You're denied opportunities, privilege. We disenfranchise here in America. The one concept of grief that makes sense, and I'm using a black cultural lens to talk about it, but it's this doctor named Dr. Doka that talks about this concept that he coined in the 80s called disenfranchised grief. Having grief that is not socially acceptable, not recognized, not validated. So black men, we are suffering griefs that society doesn't give a beep about. So just imagine carrying that weight. So when you have disenfranchised grief, you have losses that you are grieving that other folks do not deem worthy. So if your humanity is not affirmed in society, your grief is not. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of times for black men, we are ashamed of grieving. You know, I don't know how many times I have gone through this and others that I worked through, because we're not used to being vulnerable, that we don't even feel our grief is valid because this hasn't. Society tells us we don't have grief.
And that is, you know, one of the things I think is important that you said that, and we're extremely transparent. Mm-hmm. We always talk about, especially when we talk about our lives, we let you in on our personal journey, so to give people understanding. So as we talk about grief and understanding, I'll talk about myself, you know, and the levels of like loss and grief. I lost at a young age. I lost a brother, mm-hmm. right? And I was, I think 14, he was 13. Extremely close to me. I seen him actually get hit by a car right in front of me. My way of grieving, that was, I tried to, it was like, first it was like denial. Mm-hmm. And the way I denied it was like, this really didn't happen. Yeah. To mm-hmm. the point where I almost essentially like erased the fact that I actually had another brother.
Mm-hmm. Shut all the way down. I mean?
And then, you know, in that denial, I was a recluse. You know what I mean? I wasn't outgoing, and I was like, I don't want to have, you know, I know I got friends and people around me, but I don't want friends like that. So if you get to, and this happened for years and years, right? Uh-huh. This you get past it, but you only get past like a certain thing. When I say I didn't let people get close, you got close to me, but there was a level. Uh-huh. Once I felt you getting too close to where I would mourn the loss of you as an individual, all right, I'm gonna go ahead and pull back. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And find another friend and stuff like that to go to. Yeah. You know what I mean? To get to a certain level to where this is my partner, this is my friend, but once they get brother or sister status, like I'm cutting it off. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like let me find another way, push this thing back. And that was a way, a protective way. I grieved. It wasn't conscious. I did it subconsciously, but that's the way I dealt with it. And so with that being said, I understand, and we talk about again the level of grief and the level of loss. That was just one of the ways that I grieved, and I tried to protect. You know what I mean? Back then, of course, we African Americans, right? I grew up in, in the inner city. You know what I mean? It was never nobody. I didn't know about. I didn't know nothing. I knew the word, but I didn't know what it meant, and it was a reality of like counseling and therapy.
Oh yeah, it's not language that we use.
You know what I mean? I was told, pray about it
and push through.
Exactly.
Push through and pray. Hallelujah.
Essentially, that's how I became, and that's how I fell in love. Like, I found the love for music through that, because emotions and stuff like that. I was like, man, this church junk ain't working. Like, this prayer ain't working for me.
Yeah.
So I start finding music. You know what I mean? Because I was angry, I was hurt. So I found music that, okay, this was angry, this was hurt, this was this was that. It was a way, you know what I mean? It helped me grieve, right? But it didn't help me get better. It helped me deal with it.
Yes.
But it didn't help me get better, you know what I mean? And be able to, like, all right, face this, deal with it, be better.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It helped me deal with it, though.
Man, you said a mouthful. My mind is turning. It's funny when you don't have the language for something and you're not allowed to recognize different emotional states. But something that you said really resonated with me when you talked about music. That's my go-to, man. It's been me, the Stylistics, ZZ Hill, all the blues artists, because that's how I found my healing. But it's something that you said. It makes sense why you're attracted to Ice Cube, Ice-T, some of that other stuff. But also it makes sense why you love Anita Baker.
Yeah.
And you love Anita Baker because it's about that love, appreciation. She's emotionally developed in her music, so it makes sense why you would gravitate to Anita Baker. People are shocked sometimes. Like, oh, Mo like Anita Baker. I was like, no, I know Mo. I understand why he likes her. Yeah, but grief.
He beyond likes Anita Baker.
Grief is funny. Grief is funky. It's nasty, because you got to think about this. I study this. I've been a clinician for over 20 years. And I still have to go through the same process that I am telling others to go through. So if I am a trained professional and I have to go through my process and I'm rocked, every other brother gonna be rocked.
Right.
So it's like the concept of disenfranchised grief, like not having your pain recognized, is why we withhold. Because we don't see that grief as legitimate. Think about how many times pray and push through, or how many times you've been in situations where other men, if you even veer in that topic, shut it down. Oh man, grow up, bro. You know what I'm saying? Man up. That's the most dangerous thing that we heard growing up. So, Reverend Dr. Ellison, Reverend Dr. Gregory Ellison said, we're cut dead but still alive. So everything that we're dealing with has a cumulative impact. And the other thing that we have to understand about grief is multifaceted. So we focus on the mental aspects of grief, but grief has cognitive impact. So it impacts our thoughts, our ability to plan, our ability to recognize a future for ourselves. So it affects our thought pattern. It affects our behavior. When you're grieving, how many brothers act out? Let me cheat on my wife. Let me get as many women as possible. Let me stack as many guns. Let me get a record deal to talk about killing other brothers. So it affects our behavior. It affects us spiritually, because as African-centered people, we've been told to pray away and look for a better day, but we don't have any practical tools on this earth to work with, right? So it affects us spiritually. So it has a cumulative impact in those ways. And so people only focus on the mental aspect, but it also it affects us socially, because social psychology deals with our ability to how our environment affects us and how we interact with other people. So it has all of those impacts that I think that we miss.
And when we talk about the black men mainly, we talk about the traditional grief, the learning about traditional grief. In the process of my brother passing away, like, I'd never seen, like, and I seen brothers, homeboys, uncles, during all this time, until I was adult, I had never seen a man cry. I had never seen a man show weakness. Like, I wouldn't even call it weakness, but I'll just say the emotion of like, I never seen like tears. I saw angry tears before, right? Mad, do something to somebody, right? But I never seen like sorrow, like pain tears. So in that process, as I'm growing up, I've never seen this. So this is what I learned. So I'm like, okay, it's what a man's supposed to subconsciously. I'm like, all right, so
suck it up.
I ain't supposed to show no tears. I'm supposed to show, like, I can show anger. You know what I mean? I can show happiness, but there's only a certain level of happiness that I can show. But during the time we're grieving, when I'm like my brother passed away, I never cried. I didn't cry till 20. It literally was like after, you know, more recently when I lost my other brother 2 years ago, I cried and I grieved for both of them. I'm driving down the street and Stevie Wonder, like, I'm literally going to my brother's service. I'm feeling good, and it's in the morning, and Stevie Wonder's These Three Words come on.
Ooh.
And I had to pull over.
Boy, I don't mess with certain Stevie Wonder songs, bro.
Like, you know what I'm saying?
I just called to say I love you. It's mine.
I was just, it was over for me. I was like, man, I couldn't do it. And I was like, dang. And I realized that, you know, that grief wasn't, you know, just for my brother Eric. That was for my brother Brian. That was for, like, my aunt, my cousin. Was for, like, that was the first time I really, like, it truly hit me. Right? So all those years, I'm carrying this pain, you know, and it's never out. You know what I mean? It's I never relinquished it because I learned of what I saw was, this ain't what a man's supposed to do. You know,
and you know what you're describing is complicated grief. That's why I say I don't really subscribe to the Eurocentric notions of grief, because it puts timetables and time limits. You know, complicated grief is that grief that's long standing. And you know, I look at grief now as a gift. So when you have grief, not only does it get you in closer contact with your own humanity and fragility, but it shows, do I have the emotional resources and language to develop coping in this moment? What do I have the capacity for? And so a lot of times when black men, we experience grief, it is complex because we have grieved so many things. Right. Our whole life is a grief experience. If the police pull up behind us, we gonna have grief because we know so many other brothers got killed. Am I gonna die today? Right? And so not having the space and the language to talk about it, it is a gift to examine, where am I? Who am I? So grief actually brings up identity issues for black men that we have probably sometimes never addressed.
Right. And that's important. That I think that for us, we have to address when, you know, we talk about grief as a physical loss when you lose an individual, but there's also, you know, relationship grief, right? And in relationship grief and the loss of an individual, like in your life in a relationship, it causes us to react a certain way. And then that reaction and that way, it affects you with other people. In relationships, you tend to, you lose somebody you love. Thought this was the one, it's not the one. She's gone and he's gone.
I have grieved a lot of those. I couldn't pick them, okay?
And so in that grief, you know, now you are, all right, I'm become like this womanizer, or I'm never gonna let anybody else get close to me. There's levels to this. We're not gonna talk about this. We're gonna deal with this a certain way. Sometimes some people go over and above to try to be something. Yeah, overcompensate in relationships, and that happens.
Yeah,
you know, that's the reality of grief or not dealing with the grief. You know what I mean? I had conversations with people where they talk about, oh, I'm not gonna ever, you know, let anybody do this or that, you know what I mean, to me again. And I'm like, you know, I'm never gonna cook for a man again, right? Yeah. And I'm like, do you enjoy cooking? He's like, yeah, but damn that.
He ain't getting the spaghetti no more.
This person, that last person has too much control over you because you're not being who you are. It's okay to grieve that person and understand that loss, and then move on. But just understanding just the levels of, you know, different grief.
Yeah, I think we focus so much on death because, you know, as a European concept, grief is about death. But really, grief, if you really look at it, it's really just deep sorrow. You can have deep sorrow about a lot of things. You know, I think for black men, it definitely impacts our relationship. But going back to that concept of disenfranchised grief, think about the opportunities and privileges we are denied just because we are black and men. You know, I think about being denied the opportunity to grieve. So I was, you know, working on this PhD. I had a death in the family. Okay, now you recognize from being a black man, if I've lost a brother close to me, I probably need to take some time off, right? I had never taken time off. You know, I'm the push through king. Right. I push through anything. I took some time off because a family member passed, went out of town to the funeral. I come back, they trying to fire me from an opportunity because I took time off to grieve, bruh. So what does that, what message is sent to me? My humanity doesn't matter. My grief doesn't matter. And I was like, before I get fired, peace out. You know what I'm saying? Like, you know, and it's a perfect example of our grief not being validated or legitimized. Do I expect systems to validate and legitimize it? No. But it shows you our grief is different. We're not supposed to have this deep grief. I'm coming back from a funeral and you set up a meeting to try to get rid of me. Right. Because I grieved, because I took time off. So that shows you that when we grieve, it is interpreted differently, like we're not allowed to have it.
You know what? Let's talk about that, like, professionally, because I think that if you put a timeline on grief,
yes,
if you're at work and someone passes, and you put a timeline on grief, you're like, all right, you got 3 days, 5 days, come back next week. Yeah. But that person hasn't really dealt with what they have to deal with. Like, professionally, is it okay for that person to come back? You want that person to come back to that environment?
Yeah.
Or are you like, you know what? Take 2 weeks off. What do you think? As far as, you know, grief, is it okay to go back to your regularly scheduled program?
No, I think everybody tells you to do that. No, do not go back to your regularly scheduled program. Grief changes us. How can you go back to your regularly scheduled program when the grief has changed you? So you can't go back. But we've been taught to go back because you got to think about this. What's the Eurocentric value? Work, work, work till you die. If you die, they will replace you the same day and clear out your desk, right? So oftentimes we are working as black people in systems that don't care about us. And so you can't go back. And the belief that you can go back to normal is what I was saying why I don't subscribe to these Eurocentric notions of grief. You can't go back. You are forever changed. How do I navigate in this new normal? So if let's just say I have a school or I have a position and somebody has taken a loss, I would allow them the space to grieve. I also would recommend Black psychologists for them to see, okay? Because oftentimes people that are non-Black lack the empathy necessary to help us with our grief. And so, no, don't go back to normal. Figure out what you need in this new normal. So the gift I was talking about is that grief allows us to ask some questions. What do I need to feel more whole? And that's different for everyone. And also, I don't believe that certain grief stops. I'm still grieving my brother like he passed yesterday. I still grieve my father. I still grieve my grandma, which is why I was in there cooking like it was a football team coming over. So no, going back to normal is the wrong way. The way that we should be, especially for Black men, is letting them know it's okay to not know what to do. But grief gives us an opportunity to draw on new resources and experiences. And what do I mean by that? One of the psychological strengths that we have as Black people is resilience. A Black man in America is resilient as hell, right? So sometimes when you're experiencing something new, traumatic, testing you, how can I pull from this resilience in other things that I have overcome and apply those strategies to a new situation? So a lot of times it's redirecting the strengths that we have to deal with something new. So I always take a strengths-based approach because everyone has strengths. So that would be my recommendation.
Right. And I'm glad that you said that because, again, it gave me the grief and understanding of loss gave me, I went through 1,000,001 emotions. And I think once I got to the level of acceptance, that put me in a better place. I don't know but when I say a level of acceptance, I don't mean like I don't think you're ever 100% going to ever accept something or someone you losing something or someone.
Yeah.
You can, I lost a dog. I had this dog, Scrappy. Love this dog to death, right? And I was on the road and something happened to the dog and he died, right? Man, I tried to go and replace that dog with a dog that looks like him.
Yeah.
A puppy that, and I never truly loved that dog, right? Because I didn't accept that Scrappy was gone. Like I could replace him. And it just wasn't fair. And I eventually accepted it and rehomed the dog to a better place. Like somebody that was gonna give him the love that he deserved, not compare him to someone else. And I hate to metaphorically speak or make the connection between a human being and a dog, but a lot of times we do that in relationships. You lose a love. You lose a love. You lose a relationship, and you go and try to replace that relationship with somebody that either looks like this person or acts like this person or whatever. And essentially, you're just comparing this person. You compare this person. It's just not fair to that person. When it's all something you have to deal with that you have not truly faced and dealt with.
Yeah.
And so, consequently, we end up being in a bad situation, and it prolongs our grieving period.
Yes.
Because we haven't dealt with it.
I would say accept the invite to change that grief gives us. Because grief sends us invites. Hey, Ed, hey, you thought you was over some things, but we're going to set you on your tail. Right. I accepted the invite. What did I do? Not tape, canceled everything, took Lil E to a Hawks game. You know what I'm saying? I did things that facilitated joy because in that moment, life is like, ha, gotcha.
Right.
And so in relationships, in grieving losses, we normally repeat the same cycles because that invite of grief is scary and it's uncomfortable. But what we have to understand about uncomfortable moments is growth is happening when you are uncomfortable. That means that this is a growth opportunity. And so we repeat the same things in relationships because it's easy to push forward than it is to reconcile all of the mixed emotions and negative emotions that we experience.
So, all right, and this is the Reclamation Point podcast. I got a question about like something you said. Like you was like, I remember early on in this process, you like do the things that bring you joy, right?
Facilitate joy.
But doing those things, is that a substitute for like grieving and getting over it? Because I'll say where it comes from, right? I see a lot of people, some things happen with people in their lives. They may lose a relationship, they lose a loved one, and then they're like, all right, I'm gonna go on this trip. I'm gonna go on a trip for a week or whatever. You know what I'm saying? And all right, when I come back, I'm straight. Are you really straight?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, is that dealing with the grief, or is that like, I'm gonna go on a trip and I'm gonna try to forget it? You know what I mean? And then I come back and it's like riding a bike. Because I see a lot of people, the grieving process, and again, let's be clear. I think I should clarify, because a lot of times people come to me and they like, you know, especially with the Reclamation Point.
Yeah, on the show, what was you talking about? Like, I went on vacation. What you trying to say? I can't go to the Bahamas?
No, not that. But a lot of times people come to me and they think that, they ask me for advice and stuff like that, and I appreciate it, but let's be clear, I am not a professional. I'm only here
you have wisdom
to be the mouthpiece for other people, and I always tend to, when it comes to
but
the answers,
the expert is grieving right now, so what does that tell you?
You know what I'm saying? I'm only here for the questions, the answers, you know, with Ed and other professionals that we'll be having on the show. So again, I see people constantly that going back to that, are you really grieving, or are you like wishing to, like, is grief forgetting or suppressing?
Grief is the inability to suppress. Grief is like it has come to pass. The ship is off. You know what I'm saying? Like, grief is an explosion. Yeah. It's an explosion of emotions. But I'm so glad, and he says he's not a professional.
I'm not.
So your question lets me know that I need to dig deeper for the answer. Okay, because I'm taking things for granted as an expert. So when I say facilitate joy, I don't mean go to the Poconos, wild out, and you come back. That's not what I'm talking about facilitating joy. So when I say facilitating joy, I'm saying there are certain practices, values, spiritual practices, behaviors, music. There are certain things that when we do them, it brings us back to like a baseline in our mental health, right? So when I say do the things that facilitate joy, when other things traumatic have happened in your life, you normally have a thing that you go to that gets you back to within yourself. And so it gets you back to a baseline. Everyone knows their baseline because everyone knows when you don't feel like yourself. So when I say facilitate joy, what are the things that have traditionally worked to bring you back to a psychological baseline or some kind of equilibrium within yourself? That's what I mean. So you can take trips. The thing about grief, just like stress, it don't send text messages. You be in the grocery store out 12, 13, passed out, because it has a cumulative impact. So when grief hits you, it's an opportunity to figure out what you need to do. So I'm glad that you said that. No, That's avoidance is what you're talking about. So when I say facilitate joy, dig deep and think about things that you have done that traditionally work. And if those things seem unsuccessful, that is how you develop coping strategies. And a lot of things that scare us about grief is that we don't have the coping strategies necessary to deal with grief because the grief has presented a new opportunity that we're unfamiliar with. So we have to understand that grief is going to strike and do things that we're ill prepared to deal with. And that's okay. When grief hits you, allow yourself to feel however you need to feel. You want to smack somebody? Try not to go to jail. You know what I'm saying? But like, go through your process, because going through your process is how you will develop the healing rituals necessary when that type of grief or other grief comes. But we get uncomfortable with that space of not knowing what to do when you can't have coping strategies for things that are new. You develop the healing ritual for something new, trial and error. But it's that trial and error part that's scary, because we have been taught what grief has rules, stages, and things that we have to abide by. My grief strategy not gonna work for you. Your grief strategy ain't gonna work for me, because it's a personal process and more like a journey,
right?
As opposed to there's some destination. It's just a journey. You just get in the car and ride, and you ask for directions. So people like me can be your GPS on the process of grief. Like, oh no, don't go down that street. That's dangerous. You know what I'm saying? So that's how we have to look at it.
I'm glad you said that, because I think that when in grief and loss and everything, we look for, like, sometimes we look for other individuals, right, to get us through that. Some people, their grief is attached to other people cheering them up. Mine's personally, I think, again, it goes back to music, but it also just, it's me. It's something that I deal with it. You know what I mean? Like when other people try to force things and all of that, it just does not work with me. Yeah. As an individual. Like it just, what are we doing? Like it's not helping me. Yep. You know what I mean? When I come to you and talk to you about something, or it's like, but most of the time I'm going through something, I just like to be like, alone with my music and thoughts and whatever the heck I feel like doing. That is important to me, right? That's how I deal with, my grief and my things of that nature. We deal with, going back to the loss of, my brothers and loved ones. It was like grief. There was grief, but then there was guilt, because I'm like, my first brother with the accident, the guilt was like, dang, I'm supposed to be the big brother. I'm supposed to be protecting him. If I was riding a bike, I could have failed. I could have did something like this, moved this a certain way. My second brother, it was just like, man, if he did, or if I would have, it was, so my grief was like guilt grief. Yeah. I'm afflicted with that same thing, because when this recent death happened, I was like, man, I should have been there for my. I know about the guilt. I still carry that. I just really have learned to manage it. It's always there, man. It's always there. Like when I see a Michael Jordan jersey, or even when I see Jordan sometimes, because my little brother, that's all he wanted was Jordans, I freeze up. You know what I'm saying? Especially if I see a kid size. So yeah, it's gonna always be there. We just learn to manage it. But I think, one thing that people can take from our relationship is that even though I knew you was going through something, I honored your process. So like I checked on you, left it alone. I check on you, because I know that your process is,
when you're ready, it's gonna come out. But I want to at least give you the opportunity. So what we have to do with grief too is honor brother's process. When you honor a person's process, you give them the opportunity to decide what to share, as opposed to forcing. Like, I remember when my brother passed, and somebody who I am not connected with anymore, and I'm so glad, because this grief presents opportunities to see people in your life too. My brother wasn't even 10 days gone. You not over that by now? Dang, man, brother, when you gonna get over that? Let that go. I was like, you know what? I need to get this brother the hell away from me. You know what I'm saying? Because they honor my process.
I think that one of the if somebody took away from this conversation, this episode of the Reclamation Point, you and I having this conversation, somebody at home, they're watching this, they hearing this, they need, if it's one thing that I want, me, not a professional, but this is my advice for anybody to understand, black men, it is okay to grieve. It's not embarrassing. It is, you're not weak. You are, not any less than a man. It's okay to grieve. It's okay to grieve. It's okay to cry. It's okay to deal with the loss however you feel fit. However the spirit moves you.
Yeah.
In order for you to get better and to get to a place of peace and acceptance for you as an individual, after a loss, you have to be able to grieve. You don't have to cry, you gotta grieve. You don't have to be angry, you have to grieve. You have to be able to deal with your grief whichever way you can for you to be better and for you to, and I always say spiritually, for the person that you lost, for that person to be better, for that person to essentially rest in peace, they have to know that you're at peace.
Amen.
If you're not at peace, then the people you lost will never be at peace.
And speaking of the people that we lost, I believe in the ancestral realm. So how I have to process my own grief when it comes to death is knowing that these folks are ancestors working on the other side for me. So that's my spiritual conceptualization of getting some peace around it. But yeah, I would say, to brothers that, grief is a gift, you know what I'm saying? And also we have to be honest when things are bothering us. How we gonna do a show and I'm grieving and we ain't gonna talk about my grief? You know what I'm saying? So part of it is just transparency that we are struggling. But the good thing about grieving is that it reminds us of our own humanity. So when you allow yourself to grieve, you are in your most vulnerable state possible. And so for brothers to get to a point of vulnerability, I would have a grief party. You're grieving something. That's great. Because how long we have not grieved something. So I would like acknowledge that as a huge positive, that you're able to understand that you're going through deep sorrow. But what I would encourage brothers to do, figure out if they have the emotional resources to get through it. And if you don't, if you're not comfortable with therapy, seek others in your village that have wisdom as riders on the journey with you. Don't feel like you can do it by yourself. So even if you don't talk to a trained professional, try to talk to someone in your life that you respect that has wisdom that can help you navigate and figure out what resources emotionally do I need in order to cope with it. And I know I said a word and it's like I'm grieving while I'm talking. I was like, that sounded good. Let me apply that to my own life.
And listen, man. Grief is a scary emotion, man. You be like.
But it's crazy. I was like, why have I had so much loss? So I am an emergency response type of therapist. So any emergency, send Ed. But you know how I developed the skills? Not just through training. I have been trained on emergency response as well, education-wise. All the grief I went through. You know, because being a therapist, I don't know if you remember, there was a suspected mass shooter incident I had to deal with. There's been suicide. There have been murders. There have been killings. So, like, how I got to be a grief specialist is going through my own grief and learning my process. But what grief does, it allows us to give ourselves empathy and give other people empathy. And I know when I help folks through grief, they're like, how did you know to say that? Like, I always tell folks, honor their own process. You don't have to do anything. And people are like, I don't have to do anything? I was like, do you feel like doing anything? But it's through my own understanding of going through my stuff. Every grief opportunity gives me new tools. And so I try to share those tools with others. But I have found my transparency in talking about things that I've gone through, it helps other people with their grief.
So, with that being said and us discussing grief, I think that's a perfect segue because we got away from this and I was like, listen, we had to bring this back.
Yeah.
When we first started the podcast, we were like, all right, we're gonna circle back and give these folks some books. And so I think that's a perfect.
Okay, good, because I got one too.
Just a book that I've been reading. I'm almost finished, but I keep going back to passages and chapters in the book. This book called "Get Out of Your Head."
Who's the author?
Jenny Allen.
Okay, I'm unfamiliar
with her. Stop the Spiral of Toxic Thoughts, and in this book, she talks about like everything from grieving. One of that gravitated me to the book. I'm like literally reading the book, and in the first chapter, she's talking about how you can wake up and you start checking the internet, and social media, and then instead of your life, you dealing with this day in your life and what your day's supposed to be. You're bringing in all this other energy because social media, and you're going down the timeline and you're seeing everyone else's thoughts, and now those thoughts, whether it be like them grieving, them happy thoughts, them showing off their life, them showing off vacation, and you got to go to work this morning, and everyone's posting vacation pictures. Now these thoughts become toxic because you're seeing everyone's on vacation.
Yeah.
You gotta go to work.
Yeah.
You mad.
Mad as hell.
I mean? Now you mad. You looking at your husband. You looking at your wife. Like, man, why we gotta go to work? Why are we on vacation? You ain't making enough money for us to be. You know what I mean? And those thoughts and that process, how it affects us. And so, as we talk about, grieving and essentially the way we saw or way I saw other people grieve and do things affected me and affected my thought process. So I think this book is actually a good read for people just going through anything so Get Out of Your Head by Jenny Allen. Stop the Spiral of Toxic Thoughts.
And I can tell, I feel your energy. Like you love that book because it's coming over here to me. So yeah, I feel it.
It's my book of this.
Well, I got to go with Baldwin. My reading rainbow moment. Jimmy's Blues and Other Poems. So this is a collective work of poems. A lot of people forget James Baldwin was a prolific writer in various genres. So Nikki Finney is a great writer as well. I got her book Rice right there. She has an introduction in this book. So these are collected poems from James Baldwin. James Baldwin is the black male master psychologist. I don't know a dissertation. I don't know a person who is a black psychologist that does not recognize James Baldwin's thought process. So whenever I need coping strategies, I need that tell it like it is, black man in society, woe is me, how do I rise? James Baldwin. So yeah, this is Jimmy Blues and Other Poems. It's a poetry book collected of his work over time.
And with that being said, I think that we gonna take a break from this episode because it's been heavy.
Oh, it's been very heavy. I didn't even know if I could get through it. I didn't tell you that, but I wasn't sure I was gonna be able to get through it today. But claps to me, okay?
Like good grief, good grief. So dealing with grief. This has been the Reclamation Point podcast. I'm your host. I've been your host, Mr. Moetown Lee. And you can find me on all platforms. MOETOWNLEE. And my partner.
You'll see me at a Sweet Tea Center near you. But I'm Dr. Ed Garnes. I am Dr. Ed Garnes on all platforms.
Dr. Ed Garnes. And listen, like, you watching and you know, please go to Ed's all his platforms. You can book sessions with Ed. You can call me. I won't give you advice. I'll talk to you. I'll listen, and I'm gonna direct you to Ed. Like, again, this has been the Reclamation Point podcast. Thank you to U42 Studios. Thank you to our producer Dave. We don't know where Yaz at today, but hopefully
she's
on the other end of the break she'll be here.
In mine.
So, with that being said, we'll see you on the other side.
Peace out.
All right, so take a little